second portion of our June 19th Zoning Board of Appeals meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We just have one item tonight. And I guess I'll read this into the record that enlighten the audience as well as the board and the applicant that we're doing here tonight. So this is a continued item ZBA number 18-19, furtherance of implementation of specific condition 4 of the May 11, 2017 Zoning Board of Appeals decision number 17-31 regarding performance standards application of API Industries Inc., DBA of Luke Plastics for premises located at 2 Glenshaw Street, Hartford, New York, tax map designation 70218-2-15 in the LA zoning district. As more specifically described in the February 16, 2018 report to the ZBA by Jane Slade, RA, Director of the Orangetown Office of Building, Zoning, Planning Administration and Enforcement, OBSPA, and Michael Manzari, Building Inspector of OBSPA, which furtherance is prompted by the Luke Plastics Order Review dated January 23, 2019, prepared and submitted to the ZBA by John D. Fellinzer, PD of Fellinzer Engineering, LLP, which is expert consultant, was retained by the ZBA to assist the ZBA in its investigation of the loose alleged violations. A more detailed description of this application may be read in the notice of continued public hearing, copies of which are available on the table on the north side of this meeting.
Have all public notices required by state and local law been complied with, that being in particular as required by the Zoning Board of Appeals decision of May 11, I think it was, of 2017, ZBA decision 17-31, set forth the notice requirements. Those public notices have been complied with to the best of your knowledge in this public hearing tonight.
Yes.
Based upon that, motion to open this continued public hearing, and we're reopening it because it wasn't, the date that was announced for the continued previous public hearing wasn't a date, time, and place certain, so we had to republish and so on and so forth. So a motion to reopen or continue the public hearing that was previously open would be appropriate at this juncture.
Okay, so move. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
The Chairman Dan Sullivan asked me to summarize what is exactly the application that's before the ZBA right now. This is application ZBA number 18-19. The applicant is actually the Office of Building, Zoning, Planning, Administration, and Enforcement of the Town of Orangetown, also known as OBSPA, and I'll refer to it as OBSPA as often as I can. And it is not an application by the Luke Plastics or Luke. The corporate name is API Industries Inc. There may be some misunderstanding or misapprehension of whose application is this. Again, this is an application by OBSPA as Chairman Sullivan just read into the record. There was a report from Jane Slavin, the director of OBSPA, and also co-signed by Michael Manzari, the building inspector of OBSPA, dated February 16, 2018. That is essentially the application that's before the ZBA. And what that application is asking the ZBA is to find that Aloof is in violation of the performance standards, and more specifically, as was approved by the Zoning Board of Appeals in its May 11, 2017 decision number 17-31, which again approved a performance application, a performance standards approval application that was submitted by Luke Plastics back in early 2017. And there also may be a misunderstanding or misconception of what is the end result of this application if it's approved. Again, the application is from OBSPA, by OBSPA, not the Luke Plastics. Well, what if OBSPA's application is approved? What does that mean? It does not mean that the Zoning Board of Appeals can compel, mandate, require, force Aloof Plastics to redesign, to remove or install any of its odor regulating equipment, that it's filtration, infrastructure, everything and anything related to Aloof Plastics. This board, as part of this application, does not have the power or authority to mandate any physical changes or improvements or redesigns of Aloof Plastics systems or equipment or infrastructure whatsoever. That would have to be a separate application by Aloof Plastics itself, making an application to this board for performance standards approval, which it did back in May of 2017. And that decision is now back before this board, but not triggered by Aloof Plastics, triggered by an application from OBSPE, asking this board to find, if it approves OBSPE's application, that Aloof Plastics is in violation of the performance standards, and therefore, if this board agrees with the applicant, OBSPE, to rescind and revoke its May 11, 2017 performance standards approval decision that was given to Aloof Plastics. And this board is also empowered by its May 11, 2017 decision, ZBA number 17-31, to also find and determine that the building permit that was issued on June 14 of 2017 should also be revoked and rescinded. That is all that this board can do if it is so inclined, if it should find in favor of the applicant's request. That is all that the end result of this application would achieve in terms of this specific application. I think that summarizes it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the clarification. Again, back on March 26th, at the ZBA hearing per the specific condition 2 and 3, and personal observations of both myself and Mike Manzari, I did ask the ZBA to approve the consulting engineer. So we went through the process with an RFP, obtained pricing, those were reviewed, a recommendation for selection of the engineer was made, and then on September 5th, the ZBA did vote to recommend to the town board to accept Fellinger Engineering as the expert consultant in reference to this application. Fellinger Engineering report was received on January 24th, 2019, and I notified the ZBA clerk of the receipt, and we began to move forward with setting the scheduled meeting so that he can make his presentation. I give to you John Fellinger from Fellinger Engineering, who has spent the time to review Aloof's records, make a site visit, the reports from TRC, and he will elaborate on his report and his recommendations.
Thanks for having me here. I am John Fellinger from Fellinger Engineering, and I did the study. I authored the study here along with the excerpts that are included in the study. I think one of the things that we look at when we look at odors, complaints thereof, and the requirements to deal with those, we first go to the town regulations as to where this stems from. And under the Town of Orangetown Chapter 43 zoning, 4.11, and the fourth line down, they talk about odor or other forms of pollution and disturbances. And it goes on to talk about what those objectionable conditions that exist. So odors are very similar to sound in the sense that certain people are affected by them more than other people are affected by them. In fact, they talk about threshold limits, which we'll get into a little bit of the background here before we kind of orient ourselves to the building. But the background in terms of threshold detection and odor detection is based on a panel of observers, and more or less than 50% either observe it or smell it or don't. And then there's also that, determining what that odor actually is. It's a different panel that looks at that. And this panel is made up of human beings. So we could have a panel of 7 where 3 people would smell it and 4 people wouldn't. It would be considered unobjectionable, even though there would be a couple of people that are bothered by it. And that's an important thing to know, because what may bother me and may bother your neighbor may not bother a third party looking at it. And so as we go through here, we have to keep that in mind when we talk about odors and odor complaints. So some of the characteristic of an odor, what is an odor. You know, it's really a complex mixture of odorous compounds that act together to create an objectionable smell. And obviously, odor smell. Some are objectionable and some are not objectionable. There are, you can talk about a smell, and I think most people could agree that it's kind of an objectionable smell. There are some people that don't find it objectionable. I don't have to be one of those. But it's important to understand as we go through that even something that's so obvious as a skunk is a terrible smell, to some people, it doesn't bother them. So they talk about values and threshold values to where people smell those. They also talk about the concentration of the odors being emitted, how they get diluted in the air, and when they finally get to an area that may be sensitive, they're fully diluted or diluted enough that you can't smell that, or it becomes an unobjectionable odor. In reviewing this, we had to go through that background information to determine what odors might be available, what people are sensing, where they're sensing it, how that's transmitted, how that's moved from the point of origin to the point of disturbance. And it's a fairly complex process and procedure that you have to go through. And the challenge with it is that it is something you can't see. Very easy to look at a blue building and say, I don't like the color blue. You can see the color, you know it's there, it's visible, it's actual, it's confirmed. But standing in an area and three people going, boy, I hate that smell, and two people going, what smell are you talking about? It's very difficult to then, have an ironclad answer to how that occurs. In addition to that, you have the environmental conditions. Let's start with the operational conditions. Some days, a factory may produce a certain product that has a certain odor to it, or produces a certain chemical compound that causes an odor. The next day, they may be producing a different product and have a different chemical compound that produces a different odor. One may be more objectionable to one person, and the next one may be more objectionable to a person that wasn't bothered the day before. So you have and of course, we're producing something that's invisible in this particular case. So you're relying on the presence of an individual at the time of occurrence to, do a study or create a complaint or do a test or whatever to see if it actually exists or doesn't through some of the devices that the town has. And that can be a little spotty, can be a little hit or miss. In addition to that, you then have the environmental conditions that are associated with it. When the wind blows to the north, the likelihood of somebody to the south, smelling that same discharge is, nil. I'd call it zero, but it's probably not zero. The same token, that same day, when the wind shifts from the north to the south, somebody goes, "Oh, they fixed the problem." Well, nobody fixed the problem. The wind pattern shifted, and so that plume, those odors, then get moved to a different area. All of those aren't necessarily a bad thing. It's just difficult. It makes it more complex. It makes the problem more complex to address in terms of when it occurs, and it also makes the fact that it exists a little more nebulous in terms of dealing with the presence of it and how it can be dealt with effectively and consistently. And one of the challenges with dealing with smells and odors is that with all of those factors in play, it's a challenging and difficult item to deal with effectively. So in most cases, you have to start with what we call best industry practices in developing a way to mitigate these. And again, you can mitigate them potentially to 100%, but generally not. They'll generally be conditions that you can't predict, that you couldn't address, no matter what the environmental conditions, no matter what the plant is producing, to be able to fully remove those odors from the area. And when I say that, if you captured in a factory, if you captured all of the odors before they got out of the building, and you treated all of those odors, if you could maintain that 100% of the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you'd have to wind up with a primary, secondary, and tertiary system, because you have to maintain these systems also. Oh, and by the way, you can't really open up the front door because that changes the airflow dynamics within the building and the ability to capture that. So it gets very, very complex. So there is a point of diminishing return when we talk about addressing these elements of the process of capturing odors, treating them, and then discharging what I'm going to say is relatively odor-free air compared to what was captured. I think in the 2017 building permit application and construction that went on at the loop in this particular case, a lot of that work was supply fans into the building that diluted the air inside the building, which dealt with indoor air quality, I think, very significantly. So the improvements, the ventilation improvements that were done in the 2017 project that we undertook primarily addressed, not totally, but primarily addressed indoor air quality. A number of indoor or outdoor air fans that supply air to the space were added. That provides nice fresh ventilation air to the building, or certainly much fresher than leaving the air in. And then they exhausted a lot of that area. A lot of the existing fans were either reinvigorated or new fans were put on the building. They also added or included as part of that a treatment system and a capture and a hood system, which I believe addressed a certain amount of exhaust air leaving the facility. In part of that, or at least that certainly exists today as we look at it. In part of that, I think we need to go a little bit to the building and kind of talk about the orientation of the building. And so we have a kind of overall view of the building down the page is south, looking up the page is north, looking to the left is west, and looking to the right is east, as you look at it from your table. The predominant winds in the northeast, in this particular area, centered on between, what I'd say, from the south to from the west. So predominant. These are predominant winds, not all the time. Again, the winds can churn the area, in any direction, any time. But predominantly, and that's predominantly 80% of the time, 75 to 80% of the time. Weather patterns track this way. They track from the south west to the north, east. We call them prevailing westerlies because they come from the west, but they don't come directly from the west. When you talk about near the ground, but up at altitude, they come directly from the west. So as you get closer to the ground, that because of the Coriolis effect, the wind actually changes from the west to the southwest and to the south. And obviously you have hills and trees and buildings that also will shape that. But in general, you're going to see your wind coming from the south and moving to the north. And so any discharges that are coming from a factory, in this case, is generally going to move in sort of that direction. Either northeast slightly, and again, it's generally how it's going to move. Now, there are big complaints in all of the areas surrounding it, predominantly, I think, towards the northern area, but there are complaints from the south. I think you have the records, Jane, where those are. So that's sort of the general overview of the orientation of the building. That's a slightly larger picture. And as you see, as I showed here, I tried to show graphically where the discharges are coming from. And then the yellow discharges are discharges that have less odors in them, the measured odors are less than. The red ones are slightly more. And then I went to produce that on a building, and of course, because the building's north-south, vertically related, but the paper is east-west, and the building orientation is really a little more like this as we look at it on the page. So the south side of the building has some areas that generate some odors. The north side of the building has some areas that generate odors and discharges. I wanted to show the relative positions of some of the horizontal discharges shown with the cones and the way that the fan is oriented towards the building, both towards the south in this particular case and towards the west. In this particular case, towards the east. I'm sorry, that's the east. In this particular case, towards the west on the north side of it. It's important to note that because, as much as pollution should be captured at the source if it can be, there's always going to be a discharge off of a fan that you can't capture at all. It's just impossible. Okay, so there's sort of a slang term that says the solution to pollution is pollution. Well, it's not really a fair thing to say. It's not really a good thing to say. But it is something that you consider when you're dealing with pollution, or in this case, odors. Now, there is a report, the TRC report indicates that this is not, although they smell, these are not toxic odors, that's a good thing. But the more you're able to dilute that air, and that's why we talk about dilution ratios and detection thresholds, the more you're able to dilute that air, the less likely, that you and I are able to smell that and be bothered by that. So if if I'm not diluting the air, but exhausting to the west in this particular case horizontally, that won't be as effective as having an exhaust fan that, in addition to exhausting vertically, and I'll say throw the air 50 feet vertically up in, but also do an air entrainment, and they make those types of fans where you'll see, and they use them principally on chemical fume hoods and other areas like that, where you're removing, in this case, each of these marks in this particular case indicate roughly 11,000 CFM. You take that 11,000 CFM from the building, and then you include in that another 20,000 CFM of air. You've already immediately mixed that and reduced that concentration very significantly, and then you push it up into the atmosphere a little bit higher so you get it out of the breathing zone. Ideally, you'd want to capture all of those odors before they got to the fan, so that's part of the process of it. And in fact, there is a reprocessing, in the reprocessing exhaust stack here, there's a carbon bed where they have, in this particular case, in their reprocessing area, captured inside, capturing those exhaust, the fumes from the process itself, running it through a carbon bed, and then exhausting it vertically outside the building. So, relatively speaking, this treatment system, in this particular case, is working and is reducing that particular aspect of the odors that are emitted, but you still have a number of other areas that are not dealt with to the best industry standards that can be done. And so in the recommendation that I had included in the report, although I number them 1 through 4, it is the recommendation. It just happened to be numbered 1 through 4 because there's 4 different items that should be included in that. And
What page is one?
I'm on page 12 of the report. And there's the backup data is included in the report and some discussions before that. This is sort of the executive summary of it, but ideally, item number 1 is to, in the plant process of the equipment, capture the exhaust coming off of those, or the odors coming off the plant. You want to, when you can effectively do it, include a air filtration and treatment system, not unlike what's done with the carbon bed here. And either use scrubbers or other New York State DEC approved devices to first treat that air as best you can. Again, it'll never be 100% no matter what you do. You treat it as best you can before you discharge it. And then using vertical exhaust systems with air entrainment mixing, you then dilute that air and you try to get it above the breathing zone, above the capture zone of the occupants in both, within the plant and of course outside the plant, the neighboring, so both the commercial and residential areas. And in doing so, the way to start a process like this is to really get a solid system modeling, doing a complete, computer-based modeling system based on certain techniques that you intend to do, see what the results are in the computer model, refine those by, we didn't do what we thought we were going to do, we're going to add more exhaust, add more treatment, add more capture, and then it's a sort of an iterative process in doing that to get down to where you can predict, and again, these are predictive models, what 3 people out of 7 would not find objectionable, 4 people out of 7 would not find objectionable. And then that can then be looked at, reviewed through the building process, and then approved and implemented. And again, they're predictive measures. They're not absolutes. We see it all the time when we do standard building designs, when we talk about lighting levels. The light fixture produces a certain number of lumens. You take the area, you take a reflectance off the walls, and you come up with, that should be producing 50-foot candles. You know what? When it's all done, and the hue of the paint is slightly different, and the little dinge on the lenses, and all of a sudden we got 47-foot candles instead of 51. It's not exact, but it's pretty darn close. But you got to start with computer models. Otherwise, you're just sort of guessing at what you're going to do and hope it works. And that always gets people frustrated, because there's no real basis to start with. So I think one of the things in the 2017 work that was done was, that work, I think, did a significant job in improving the indoor air quality in the building. I don't know that it did enough to address the outside air quality. I'm not sure it was even, based on the drawings I saw, there really wasn't a lot of addressing the outside air quality. But I think it did a lot to address the indoor air quality. I was not at the site before 2017, so I don't know about that. And that sort of concludes my main presentation for all this. Question? Board member.
Well, I agree with John's assessment in that it doesn't seem that the previous submission for the performance standards that was approved actually addressed the complaints that the neighbors were putting forth and experiencing, because we're still getting those complaints. I myself have observed the odors, so has Michael Manzari, our inspector, and an inspector from DEME. Now, again, they are hard for us to capture and find, because by the time we're notified, because we do have other jobs to do, we're going there. But when we do see them, they are documented, and they are issued violations and summonses, which I think everyone's aware, and those are being processed through our court system at this time. So obviously, it is affecting the neighborhood, and based on Mr. Fellings's report, I don't think they achieved what they said they were going to achieve back in 2017.
It seems as if though what they wanted to achieve in 2017 isn't the entire building, right? We know we approved. So there are multiple other locations outside of that are an issue. Is that safe to say? I mean, based on the drawings and knowing what we approved back then.
Right, well, that was the initial presentation I made to the ZBA. You saw all the different fans and how it doesn't seem that all of that stuff was accounted for. As Mr. Fellinger said, you can bring fresh air in and pump it into the building, but it's not necessarily doing what it needs to do when it's releasing the building. So that seemed to be an issue, and that was one of the reasons we knew something was not accounted for. So it seems to me, again, based on the minutes of that meeting, their experts were saying that there would be no more odors. They're the ones that testified to that. They didn't say, well, we think we're going to get rid of some of them. They said they were going to get rid of them, and there'd be no more complaints. However, that has not happened.
And what has the response been from the company regarding this, especially this report?
We have not received a response.
They've seen this report.
Yes, this was made public a week prior to the last scheduled meeting, which had been postponed.
Which was April 3rd. It was April 3rd?
Yeah, the last meeting date was scheduled for April 3rd.
And no response.
No comment at all.
None, no comment.
Okay.
I got a question. In all the tests that have been performed and the removal of air from the building, has there ever been a test where extreme heat is burning or that exhaust air is going through extreme heat? And if that has anything to do, would have anything to do to reduce the odor? Do you know of any?
I don't know of any tests that were done like that. I'm not, and maybe you need to ask the question one more time about the extreme heat. I'm not quite sure I understand.
Well, what I'm saying is, when you put air through a burner, a high density burner, thousands of degrees, will that change the consistency of the air after it goes through this burning process?
Such as the catalytic oxide.
Sure. I mean, I think all of those things, any and all of those treatment systems exist. How that, I don't know how that would affect what's currently being discharged and how that would address it. But yeah, I think what we're looking at in this particular building is there is one significant area that they capture, they capture their odors in the building, they treat those odors and they discharge them. There are other areas in the building where they're just discharging, the air. And in certain cases, they are discharging it vertically, so that would have a dilution effect that would have less of an effect in the surrounding areas. And in other areas, they're discharging horizontally, which has a lower component or a lower ability to effectively dilute the air before it becomes, a non-threshold event. And I think that's where I'm looking at it from sort of when you step back and look at it sort of from a what I call a 30,000-foot view, is what's the good, what's the bad, and what's the indifferent. So the good is they are treated. The bad is that all the horizontal discharges are, discharging very similar air, not identical because it's in slightly different areas, but there's no such thing as 100% capture, so some of those smells within the buildings are being discharged from things that are pointed horizontally. And then some of the indifferent is that you have areas in the building remote from where the odor is being developed that have exhausted. In fact, I have a couple of those areas shown that have no color code to them because they're inconsequential discharge, odorous discharge from the building. They exist, they discharge, they happen to be mushroom fans, but they don't, they'll have no, negative effect in the surrounding areas. So you look at those things and you look at the elements, what's the most significant elements and what's the least significant elements, and then you start addressing those. And again, it has to start with a computer-based model and looking at that, because it's not just what you discharge, it's how you discharge it, and it's not just how you discharge it, it's how the environmental conditions in the prevailing area affects that. And every day is different, so you choose a couple of different, I'll say significant or say the normal prevailing westerlies, you look at it that way, then you look at other different wind directions, other different environmental conditions, temperature can affect it. The hotter the air comes out, the more it's going to rise on a cold day, just the opposite on a warm day. Humidity will affect it. And these, again, are all predictive results. The goal is to get that prediction down to, you'd love to get it to zero. I can tell you today, it'll never happen. I learned from an attorney once, he said, if you go to an attorney and he says, don't worry, I'll win the case, he's lying to you. Because they can't guarantee that, because the jury's the one that makes that decision, not the attorney. Okay? I can't tell you that it would be impossible to tell you that there'd be zero odors at the end of any project that you did. So anybody that promises zero odors is again, overstating their capabilities, maybe overconfident. So again, I can tell you that that light is going to be 50-foot candles. Everything else has to be the same to be able to give you that exact number. Okay, but you can absolutely get a prediction within a certain range that you can effectively say, look, you've had 100 complaints last month. If we do this, we know that the amount that we add treatment systems and we add exhaust systems, we know that those complaints will go from, we'll address this by a 70% factor. We know those complaints will go from 100 to 30. Okay, that's a step in the right direction. If that's enough, you look at it, you go, okay, it's enough to do that. If it's not, then you look at what it takes to get that number down even further.
If I can add to your
Yeah,
question, the TRC did testing right at the release points. Last year, I asked the...
Yeah, but actually, the testing is with the air coming out at the temperature, the same temperature. But if the air coming out has gone through a procedure where extreme heat is put to it, had that ever been done?
No test has been done on that.
I believe that should be done to see if the temperature of the smell is changed, its consistency, when it goes through a high heat process. Now, if it hasn't been done, then I think this is something like a layman, like I am, think that should be done. Because it's something there that I was saying.
I don't know that we'd be offered the opportunity to have a test like that done, because that would have to be done within the facility.
Right.
And our code really is at the property line, is where the violations occur of the nuisance odors. So the fact that we were able to obtain the odors at the release points was very helpful in determining what was going on and where the odors were coming from. The test that you're speaking of, I think would be very difficult for us
Well, I think it should be performed. I believe that air, smell of air can change with temperature, and a high extreme temperature, like a flame, or that the air is pushed through, or being pushed through, feeding the gas that's being burned. That would change.
The typical process in government relations and governing bodies is that you normally set a standard for which the applicant has to meet. And that's true whether it's a building, a parking lot, or odors, or objectionable noises, and those types of things. So you set that standard. How they deal with that is a lot of up to how the applicant wants to deal with it, or in this case, the person who may be violating an ordinance has to deal with it. Because if that's one way to deal with it, great. They want to put a filter on it, and that deals with it, great. If they want to dilute it, and that deals with it effectively, great. All of those processes are out there on the table to implement. They're all out there to consider. They should be, they should be done very professionally, and then they should be reviewed by the board. The board needs to get an expert to review that to say, okay, here's what's being said. Is there anything being missed? What are those comments? And that's a very typical process, particularly in the planning board side. Where an applicant comes in, they have a parking lot, they have setbacks, and they have all of those things, and they talk about grading and parking and paving and stormwater management. You hand it to the board hands it to their engineering consultant, their engineering consultant comes back with 75 comments. The guy who submitted it goes, hey, I think everything's right, otherwise he wouldn't submit it. And the board looks at it, and the board's engineer goes, here's my 75 comments. I want a couple of trees here. The setback isn't quite right at this particular point. The roadside distance for the turnoff needs a second lane or a third lane to slow down, or whatever it happens to be. And with all good intentions, the applicant that's submitting their solution, again, thinks they did it right. Apparently, what was said in 2017, there'll be no more smells. Okay, I can tell you that that's impossible. It just doesn't exist. But it's certainly a step in the right direction. And then the return comments should then be addressed so that there can be a meeting of the minds and that everybody can be on the same page to understand that we all believe that this will work. And again, it's predictive results. We can be much more assured that you're going to come up with a solution. So to your point, yes, that's absolutely a possible solution.
Can I make a point that I think that test should be done?
It typically be done by the applicant, yeah.
Can I ask a question? I'm thinking back to 2017, and I realize it was 2 years ago, but there was discussion about exhaust air filtration systems on their part that would have alleviated or eliminated the problem.
I wasn't present for that meeting. I was not in a position to know, but
So there were
whatever they-
exhaust
yeah.
filtration systems put in.
It's more of the internal.
Right,
Yeah.
it was really internal, but nothing extra.
So
Parts per million that they talk about.
based on the drawings,
Just all
John
internal
reviewed.
stuff.
yeah, and I'd have to go back and look at it, but if there were some put in, and there could have been, I'm not looking at the plans, and I hate to do it by memory. Whatever was on the plans was put in. I don't think they didn't do what was on the plans. But I can tell you that when you look at the building and walk through it, all of the exhaust fans that I'm showing that aren't filtered are there, they're exhausting air, they're not filtered. So, again, they're coming not from areas directly next to where their high orders areas are, production areas are produced. But they're coming from areas within the building, and so some of that migrates over, and, it's a challenge to deal with.
So do you know how many fans are not filtered?
A lot, yeah, I don't. I hate to use that term, that's not.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I could get you I could get you an accurate number, tomorrow, but we're looking at,
I'll save you time, over 20.
yeah, I'd go with that, over 20.
that was in my report.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. Yeah, could be 22 or 23, not a lot of 23. And then there are some that are filtered.
This was submitted as part of my last presentation to the ZBA board. That was done at Town Hall in the big, I'm sorry they're not in color, but they point out the openings that John is referencing.
Now, in the report, it does talk about air pressurization or differential, supply. So I think they're doing a very fine job getting pressure into the building, improving the indoor air quality. The building is under negative pressure. So they're not, whatever is inside the building is being exhausted. Again, some of which is going through the carbon filter bed and being treated and exhausted, and other stuff is not.
So I guess the question is, nothing has changed since this?
Very little.
That's the question. Okay.
Right? Nothing's changed.
Okay.
Just a quick question. Mr. Fellinger, your report indicates you're a PE. Are you a New York State licensed professional engineer?
Yes, I am.
And to follow up to John's comments about having, when and if Aloof decides to come back for performance standards to hopefully remedy the situation, Mr. Fellinger, as part of the RFP that we put out, will do those reviews. That was that's the next step. So he would review and offers comments back, and review and offer as many times as it takes to hopefully get to a point of compliance.
We do a computer-based model, right? It would be every opening.
When you do
Size,
computer-based, it's really every exhaust point, because that's technically where all,
or what if there's holes in the side of the building?
well, those should be covered up. Those certainly should be covered
So
up.
they should be part of the analysis if it's not.
They should be, when you do the computer modeling,
Excuse me.
you have to, right, you gotta make sure that the computer model covers everything. The challenge is that you have openings in the building, you can't model it as, the air kind of drifts out of that particular space. So again, the building's under negative pressure, you have to make a certain level of assumptions that, first of all, no building is ever airtight. Certainly if you have a gaping hole, you gotta cover that for a bunch of different reasons, but one primarily from an odor transmission or, pollution transmission points, it should be covered up. But when you're talking about exhausting 300,000 CFM, and then you've got, 10 by, really, 4 by 4 window opening. 4 by 4 window opening is inconsequential to the 350,000 CFM that you're exhausting. So you do have to kind
Unless
of.
there's enough.
That's true, that's right. If you only have one small one, I would say, not that I say don't worry about it, it just becomes inconsequential. But yes, absolutely, you're absolutely right. If you've got, there are some factories that used to have all the high windows up there for lighting. If they're all broken, then yeah, that's absolutely, or they're open, that's absolutely, not inconsequential. So, yes, you do have to look at that. You wouldn't include that in the computer model, you'd fix that as part of being able to generate a reliable computer model. Did I answer? I hope I answered your question.
And Jane, not to leave you out, I think it's a matter of public record, but you're a New York State registered or licensed architect?
That's correct.
Just getting on the record.
So Jay, the decision that you're asking us to make tonight is essentially to revoke, reverse, rescind the 2017 ZBA decision and pull the building permit.
That's
Because
correct.
they're in violation of the performance standards, is that right?
That is correct.
Can I ask Mr. Fellinger? In relation to that question, Dan, based upon your review of the documentation that was provided to you and I think you did an on-site inspection as well of the Aloof Plastics facility, and any other materials that were provided to you in your review of the performance standards of the Orangetown zoning code, chapter 43, in your professional engineer's opinion, is what you observed at Aloof in violation of the performance standards? In other words, not in compliance with the regulatory scheme of the performance standards?
In the sense that the odors are being sensed by areas across the property line, is that?
Well, you read the performance standards. It says that the infrastructure, the mechanical equipment, et cetera, of whoever the operator of a particular commercial business that's subject to performance standards, which Aloof Plastics is what is currently installed, what you observed, and what it's reflected in your report, in compliance with those performance standards. Is it meeting the regulatory requirements of the performance
Yeah,
standards?
so the performance standards don't The answer is that they're not meeting the performance standards. I wouldn't say that I can't tell you that the exhaust fan that's blowing, you know, horizontally doesn't meet the performance standards, because that's just a component of the whole issue associated with the level of contaminants or level of odors in the space and how that gets out and across the property line and how it's sensed by other people. So the performance standard is set that says you can't, you know, have odors or objectionable odors, you know, across the property line. The equipment that was installed and designed and installed in 2017 was installed, you know, as best I can tell. I don't think that in doing that work, they've met the performance standards. All I think that was their goal, you know. But I wouldn't say remove the equipment, if that's the question being asked,
No.
because it's doing.
It's definitely not my question.
Okay.
My question, I'll ask it a different way, is if this design came before the ZBA as an application for performance standards approval, as it did back in May of 2017, and you were the expert consultant that was retained by the Zoning Board of Appeals to review the application submissions and opine to the ZBA whether or not it's in compliance with the performance standards, what would your determination be? What would your recommendation be?
I would have made a number of different recommendations to the way the design was presented, at least what I saw on the plans, addressing how the exhaust air is treated, where it's treated, what's being treated, how it's being exhausted from the building, and how that exhaust air is being diluted as it's exhausted from the building. Which really goes down to my recommendation in this report, which is simply some of it's being treated and some of it's not. So you have to treat capture and treat all of the exhaust air, and you have to dilute that closer to the source so that it doesn't, you know, migrate in relatively high concentrations, undiluted. You know, obviously dilutes as it migrates, but you know, if it starts as an undiluted source, by the time it migrates, it's not as diluted if it starts as a diluted source and migrates. It becomes more diluted. So, in answer to your question, I would have made a lot of recommendations to the applicant and how the design was done. And again, in looking at the design and the way it was done, I think it did a great job. Not perfect, but a great job in dealing with the indoor air quality. I don't believe it addressed the outdoor air quality or what's being exhausted to any significant portion. It may have treated a portion of it significantly, but it didn't treat all of it significantly. Hence the issues that you're having, and when you look at the report and the red and the yellow areas and how that area is being discharged, you kind of look at it. I look at it, it kind of makes sense why you still have some issues. Does that answer your question?
I think so. One part of the performance standard says that will any of the operations emit odors or et cetera. And then on another item number, I don't have, I was just asking how many for the form, there's another item number that says, what are your control measures to control this? They've identified and said that we would control those odors, which it doesn't, and therefore they're not in conformance with our performance standards. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but does that sound reasonable?
That's a reasonable explanation. Sure.
Right, Jane, I mean, I kind of.
Correct. I have the
Spoke from the hip there, but.
I have the form that they filled out as part of the approval from May 11, 2017. Reviewing the performance standard form that they filled out back in 2017.
Yeah, so item 13 asks what smoke, odor, dust, fly ash, gases, vapors, or other potential contemplated, and the response is any air emissions will be controlled pursuant to the DEC air permit. And it's the air permit number with existing physical filters and carbon filtration, current application requests permits for installation of additional building ventilation systems and carbon filtration on and exhaust system in the reprocessor room to further dilute potential ambient building exhaust emissions to below odor thresholds. And they may very well address it in that particular, and they're very clear about it, in the reprocessing room. They're very clear that that's where they added that filtration and I'll say capture filtration and dilution system. And they did that. I believe that they did that. How that is addressed, and again, with 350,000 square foot building. So how they address it in the other areas is the question I would have. To your point about, if I were commenting on it, I would have asked other questions about how
So
to deal with
it's
other.
essentially an incomplete answer. Is that what you're telling me?
What's that?
It's an incomplete answer.
Well, their answer
Or
addresses
solution.
just the reprocessing room. It doesn't even discuss the other areas, you know.
As
So-
one facility, it only addresses one area, which makes
Right.
it, therefore makes it.
And I'm not an expert in the process, nor do I intend to be. I don't know what their other processes are in the buildings, per se. But there's,
If I can elaborate on that, they specifically referenced the DEC permit.
Right.
Received an email this evening at 6 p.m. They're still not in compliance with that. Thank you for reaching out. DEC continues to require LOOF to implement an effective solution to address odors. As you are aware, the department is currently in a permit hearing process with LOOF to ensure this happens. That's from the acting regional director.
Go backwards, sorry, but you had mentioned when we looked at the drawing, there may be 23 some odd fans that aren't filtered. The document that you submitted, that we just looked at, had at least 30 openings that weren't fans. Okay, so that's documented, what you do.
The picture.
That's
Right,
correct.
Exactly.
Is that part of the 23 exhaust fans? So you understand where I was going before
okay.
with the holes, it wasn't just holes.
Yep.
There's 30 spots in those, whether they're vent pipes, whether they're grills that are broken, whatever be the case, whether you're negative pressure or not, air is escaping and smells and odors are escaping.
Certainly.
That's besides the 20 some odd exhaust fans that are not filtered. Well, let's be very clear, because that becomes 53 locations in that building that do not have filters on them, and/or close it all.
Intakes.
That doesn't
And
matter.
yeah,
It doesn't matter.
yeah. And really to kind of further explain my answer to you is that you can't, you're much more challenged in a computer model to deal with exhausting here and having an opening there. And to your point, that opening needs to be closed before you do that, as part of the computer model, saying, I'm going to close this, it is vent opening or whatever it happens to be, and treat it all through the exhaust system. Because again, you have to capture, treat, and exhaust. And you can't do that if you have building openings, so you can't include that in the computer model. So I guess I maybe misunderstood the question.
That's okay, it's just more of a point of that there are
Yeah. Oh,
multiple
you're-
locations, on-street
Yes.
locations, other than the 23.
So I'm not an engineer, but is that part of the DEC permit requirement? Is that all these openings, are they being addressed by someone?
We have not seen their requirements in the reports. They're active, they're technically independent of us. However, we try to coordinate our efforts, obviously, so that duplicate work is not being done, or they're having them install a system that, and we're having them install something else that would make sense. But other than that, we haven't seen anything from them.
Okay. Board, any further questions from the public? Okay, we open the meeting up to the public. Guidelines are that just stand in line, come on up, stand at the mic behind the applicant, who is Jane. You're going to be sworn in first. Once we state your name and address, so we understand your standing.
Do you want me to sign it?
And we're going to ask that you limit your responses to 3 minutes.
With the mic, it's not.
Just slide it. So if you see me raise my hand, just try to get to it. Okay? So you sort of tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
It can be
what's your name, sir?
Michael Smith,
Address?
65 Hayes Street, Lovell.
Hayes?
Hayes, that's correct.
Thank you.
So I want to make a couple points. One, the engineer's report is completely accurate. I would concur with everything the gentleman says. Unfortunately, this same information, and I know that the process has to be gone through, the same information has been relayed to this board, to the town board several times over the past several years. It's not rocket science. I appreciate the lesson on smells, but we all know that smells are affected differently by different people, and that we're never really going to be able to eliminate this situation 100%. I think there's definitely a few people in the town who would like it to go away completely. The fact that these guys are doing this in the area is ridiculous, of course, but that's water under the bridge. So the reason, while there was an effect to benefit a little bit, the last renovation that they did, or the equipment that they added, the reason that they did that was really because they had ocean issues. I think the town and the townspeople brought this up as an issue, and the reason that they added all that air was because they had indoor air quality problems that their own workers were going to start complaining about if they didn't address it sooner. So the intent was never really to resolve the problem about the odors going to the town. It was really to address the immediate issue of having ocean concerns. We've said several times there really should be no air coming out of this facility, barring a few exceptions, maybe some bathroom exhaust in a couple of office areas, that is not untreated. It's very simple. Treat the air coming out of the facility. These people have been avoiding this capital expenditure for 20 some odd years. And to show that they have no good faith, the fact that they have 30-something openings that Jane identified in the side of the building, you shouldn't be able to allow to operate a business, period, with holes in the side of your building. Forget about the exhaust issues. Why do they have holes in the side of their buildings? It's ridiculous. So this is nothing that's, this gentleman's idea that you want to add additional infiltration air to dilute it, that's great, but nothing should go out of this facility that's not treated. We've said this for years, and I think if you did that, this whole issue would be over. You resolve 90% of your problems. They're making $100 million a year in revenue, and let's say they get a 10% net. After all their expenses are covered, they're still making $10 million a year. They can't make a one-time $3, $4, $5 million expenditure and just resolve this issue. It's ridiculous. They've been dragging their feet, for the last 15 years on this issue. It's ludicrous. And really for no reason. You should be ashamed.
Sir, address the board, please. You're running out of time.
Okay.
You have 3
That's really it. The secondary treatment system, it would be great if you could isolate it to really the area of production and have a concentration of that air and then exhaust it, treat it. But at the very least, you have wall exhaust with no treatment. Resolve that. Most of your problems are going to be taken care of.
Anybody else? Raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Name and address.
Tim Toolin,
Could you just spell your last name for us?
T-O-O-L-E-N,
Thank you. And your address?
121 Irving Street, Midland Park, and that's in New Jersey. So I've worked in Rockland County and many of the businesses in Rockland County for 25, 30 years now. And I appreciate everything that the engineer said, but I've been in and out of every one of the businesses here in Rockland, and I've seen them come and go. I've worked at Aloof now for, probably 3 years. And at no point in time have I ever been to the facility where I've been faced with objectionable odors or anything that I would say would be adverse, at least to my understanding. But I guess that means I'm one of the 50% that doesn't have an objection to the odor. But what I will say is, my neighbor who lives next door to me, I think I'm going to go to my town planning board tomorrow and say something about their clothes dryer and whatever the fabric softener is that they use, because my wife and I can't stand that, so we're probably gonna take up a similar thing. Anyway, thanks.
Great, go on. Next. Raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes,
Name and address.
my name is James Ross. I live at 86 North Midland Avenue in Nyack. And I'm a member of the town's Air Quality Review Committee that was appointed early last year. And I just want to say two quick things to the board. First, thank you all for your service. But the thing I want to say is we certainly do hope that you do find that Aloof is not meeting their performance standards. It's obvious to me, and I believe to all the other members on the committee, that odors continue to come from the plant. I don't live in the area around the plant, but I've been there many times. I've smelled the odors to the north. I've smelled the odors near Dominican College. I've smelled the odors on Spruce Street. Wherever it's downwind and you get the right kind of a day, it's very possible to smell the odors from the plant. And so I certainly hope that you do support Jane's motion. And the second thing I'd like to say is in response to the engineer's report. I thank the engineer for his work. It sounds very, very good. The Air Quality Review Committee really does hope that any solution includes some sort of scrubbers or carbon filters or carbon beds, something to actually remove the odors from the air. We don't believe that simply diluting the exhaust from the factory is going to do it, but actually removing the stuff from the air in the parts of the plant that are not currently treated. So thanks.
Great, thanks. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do. Allison Sullivan, 42 Arthur Street in Blauville.
I'm sorry, what, Arthur?
Arthur. I was going through the odor report system on the town website, and I was trying to compare month to month last year to this year, just to see if there were any improvements in the odor complaints. And I just wanted to share that with you, just so we're clear. They started that system, I believe, last March 2018. So I started in April just to give it some sort of consistency. In April of 2018, 60 odor reports surrounding Aloof were reported. And when I say surrounding, that could have been Aloof, Blauville, Orangeburg area. I minus any areas like Pearl River and stuff like that. So 2018, 60 odor reports in April. In April 2019, there was 59, so one less. In May of 2018, there were 33 odor reports. In May of this year, there were 44. In June of 2018, for the entire month, no, actually for up to the 19th, because I wanted to compare it with the right stuff, there were 5. And then to date, there were 10, so it doubled this year. We've been dealing with this, for many years, over the 3.5 that we've presented this to the town. I really hope that you guys can provide the residents with some sort of relief. I know it's a process, and we are trying to be really patient. I so appreciate this report. I found it gave me a lot of knowledge that I'm going to share with my husband, because I feel in some cases it's sort of hopeless at this point, and that makes me really sad, because this is the house my husband grew up in. And, I really don't know what to do at this point. My youngest son has 3 years left in school, and we'd like to stay. We would really, really like to stay. We love our home. So please do whatever you can do to give us some relief. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Name and address.
Menachem Polt, Walter,
Could you spell that?
MENACHEN,
And your last name?
POLTER,
And your address?
I'm sorry? POLTER, 11 Route 340, Orangeburg. I don't know how much value what I'm going to say carries after listening to the engineer's report and learning about smells and how they affect different people. But I first learned about the smell problem as soon as I moved into my new home in December. I got a letter addressed to me probably within the week from a law firm in Michigan asking, can you smell things, can you sign, and stuff like that. I wasn't even familiar, and doing a little more research, I discovered and heard that there was stuff. So all I can say and add is, we're here 7 months, I've got a stunning, beautiful backyard with a pool. I jog the Joseph E. Clark Trail every day, and I have an allergy background, so I am allergic. I personally do not sense, feel, any smells, and I just wanted to put that on record.
Great, thank you. So tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Maureen Aitchison, AITCHISON,
Thank you.
78 Dutch Hollow Drive in Orangeburg. So my home is across the street from Tappan Zee High School, which is an area where the smell is very prevalent. I work at Dominican College. I'm a parishioner at St. Catherine's Church, and I don't know what's going on at 11 Route 340, but the smell is an assault on my senses most days. I walk every morning, so a lot of times my reports are at around 7 o'clock in the morning when I can get home and do it. But very often I walk out of Casey Hall at Dominican and it smells. I go over to Prusnack, it smells. I walk the rail trail, it smells. There's very, very few days that it doesn't, but I've gotten to the point where it's like, am I gonna sit down and take 5 minutes or 10 minutes out of my day to report to the town? But I feel like it's just not gonna do anything because it's not being addressed. So I appreciate this report. I appreciate Jane's diligence. I've submitted my affidavit about when I got sick from the actual smell one day. I've been in contact with James on email about, when I report and he tries to go over there right away. I just feel like at this point, just something needs to be done to address it. There's just nothing that's changed in the last, since they said they were going to change it. It just hasn't changed. So I feel like being as centered in this area as I am, I don't go that far. I mean, my kids are here. It's an assault. So just if you could do something about it. Every other smell that we get, you smell cigarette smoke at a bar, you can go to the owner. Someone's dryer vent is going, well, it's going to be over in an hour when their laundry is dry. So there's different things that, smells happen, we get it, but this has been years.
Thank you.
Sir, tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Denise McGuire,
I can do
McGuire, M-A-G-U-I-R-E.
And what's your first name?
Denise,
Denise.
D-E-N-I-S-E,
And where do you live?
31 Arthur Street, Lavelle. So, I hate nothing more
Just
than,
get closer to the mic.
I hate nothing more than talking in public, but I have been reporting on loose plastic for more than 8 years. I'm one of the first persons to report on loose plastics. The smell is, in my yard, horrific. You can actually physically taste it if you want to come to my backyard some days. I have been reporting it, begging the town, from Mr. Price at the DEC to Mr. Cuomo in Albany to Ms. Slade, for somebody to please do it. Members from Aloof have shown up at my front door. Mr. Price was alive, asking me not to report any longer. I thank you guys for doing what you do to help our community, but I think our community is being taken down by this company. So if there's anything that anybody can do, I'm begging you to please
You have to have signed up to speak?
No. Raise your hand. That's all you got.
Okay.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Great. State your name and address for the record.
Okay. Vicky, V-I-C-K-I. Last name is Marquette, M-A-R-K-I-E-T.
Address?
11 Beechwood Road in Blauvelt. On the night of May 16th, this year, I came home from a PTA event at sunset, and I saw my son getting ready to walk our dog, and he had an awful look on his face, and I got out of my car, and we both, at the same time, smelled something so awful, and he said, Mom, I don't know what to do, and ran in the house and closed all our windows, and it was a terrible chemical perfume odor, and for the rest of the night and the next day, we were nauseous with headaches, and I posted a message and asked if anyone else was suffering, and indeed they were. That night, so many community members shared that they were feeling sick and smelled it, and it was awful for me because I couldn't fix it for my son, I couldn't do anything, and I was dismayed and heartbroken that it was happening in our home, where we live, and I haven't felt the same way about our community since then, and I'm still in dismay that this is even a fight. And I understand that there's all these particulars of a company of a town that have to be addressed. It's been a learning curve for me about this company, but I'm just heartbroken that it's happening in our home, and I'm just in dismay that it's going on. And I needed to say that tonight so that it was heard.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else?
Can I just say one thing? Oh, sorry.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
Your name, sir?
Ed Coffey,
C-O-F-F-E.
C-O-F-F-E-Y,
I want you to back up.
33 Heritage Drive, the city of New York. Okay, I've contracted for a loaf for last 20, 25 years, back when we were a much smaller company. I've spent countless hours there, probably as much as anybody who's not an employee there. My guys are inside and outside the plant for years, and I don't get any complaints when I'm there from my guys about odors, about feeling sick, feeling nauseous, any of that. We don't have any of those issues. And I've always found the management to a loaf to be extremely proactive when it comes to the matter of safety, and anything the town's ever addressed for me to do for a loaf, I've gone to them, and there's never any kickback on their part. To the point where a few years ago, we blanketed the place with carbon monoxide detectors, and up to this day, we haven't had a single activation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, how are you?
Raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Name and address for the recorded board.
Pete Stemkowski, Clarity Water,
Could you just spell your last name?
Stempkowski.
And your address, sir?
My home address is 78 Waramus Lane, Hillsdale, New Jersey.
78 what?
Waramus Lane,
Spell that.
W-I-E-R-I-M-U-S, Lane, Hillsdale, New Jersey.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
My business is actually located on Route 59. I do process chemistry. I was hired by Aloof about 2.5 years ago. My main focus is to make sure that I reduce energy consumption and water consumption. I'm an efficiency expert to help reduce carbon footprint. Pretty much any project I wanted to do there, I've been able to do. They've never even asked me what the cost was. If it was better to do, we did it. Any project I want to do, they're very much, ears open. What are we doing? Why do we want to do it? Is it better? Let's do it. I haven't really come across anything there that projects that I want to do that was not embraced. So I've been there for 2.5 years. I'm a local business owner. So I help out anyone I can.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Now you spoke already, I got you.
I was painting my house on Sunday, I got smelled over the paint. I'm sorry.
That's great, I know, we know it smells. That's why we're here tonight. Anyone else? Go once.
I have a letter for the board.
Sorry. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but
I
the
do.
truth? Sorry, it's getting late.
Yeah, I understand.
I have a process. Name and address.
That's right. John Curran, Side Badging, Brazil, PC, on behalf of API Live.
Could you just spell your last name?
C-U-R-R-A-N. There's should be 6 of them there? I don't, but I can give you the information. Tennessee.
I have one for the record.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Have two.
3 minutes, you gotta summarize this.
I feel like I should sing a song. Okay, I will try not to waste my 3 minutes.
Or rap, whatever.
Yes. To be clear, the town called for this hearing in order to shut Aloof down. And while I'm sure that there are many, including a lot of the people in this room, who consider that a victory, and I'm also sure that it would make them sleep better at night to think that shutting down Aloof would be little more than a smudge on a corporate balance sheet. So let's put a face on it. Aloof employs nearly 400 people. Those nearly 400 employees have families. They have husbands, they have wives, they have sons, they have daughters. Aloof is the source of livelihood for literally dozens of hardworking families. So I'd like somebody, if this company gets shut down, to be the ones to explain to these people and their children why mom's not going to work or dad lost his job or the summer vacation's not happening this year.
We're not in a blame situation here.
No, I understand.
You jumped to a conclusion that we're getting shut down.
No, okay. So I wanted to,
to.
fine, so let's, the reason I'm saying it's gonna be shut down is because if you revoke the permit, they can't operate their ventilation system.
So we're not getting into a legal battle now.
Understand.
This case has been going on for a number of years, and we're not gonna get into the legal stuff. Aloof has not worked with the town.
So,
with
but
Jamie.
but you're making assumptions. You're not,
This is all testimony.
exactly, so read my letter. Jumping to conclusions, let's talk about the Fellinger report.
Go ahead.
Mr. Fellinger didn't do any of his own studies. He based his conclusions upon data that's more than a year old, about observations, late observations that were made by building department officials more than a year ago. He was tasked, from what I understand, to make a conclusion based on his own study as to whether Aloof was in violation of performance standards, but instead he jumped immediately to the assumption that they're in violation of performance standards, and then based all of his conclusions and recommendations from that assumption. You read his report. He states clearly, there are all these complaints, so obviously there are smells. How is that scientific?
Where did the DEC fall into that?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, let's not have a dialogue. You can finish your statement before we move on.
Yeah, a minute.
Yes.
So, I implore the board, read my letter. I think if this board would make a decision on what's before it right now based on this report and based on the report from the building department, it would be the very different definition of capricious. Thank you.
Anybody else? So tell the truth, the whole truth, and what the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Name and address.
Heather Hurley, 202 Hart Street in Fall River. I just have a question for Aloof's attorney who just spoke. He's getting up.
He's not gonna respond, so we.
Okay, but for the board, if you have the information, yes, if you have the.
We're not in a dialogue. Whatever, that person who just spoke is not at the table. The applicant is sitting here.
Okay, so I'll ask the board if you can ask Ms. Slavin, yes. So can you please ask Ms. Slavin, when was the last time that she was allowed into the Aloof facility by Aloof to do any inspections? And that includes the building department, any building inspectors, the DEC, if she has that information. When, what were the dates that Aloof themselves allowed the town into the building to inspect, and when did they allow the DEC in to inspect, or any other of the people making reports? Thank you.
Thanks. The DEC was there to.
Sir,
Excuse me,
you can't speak either. Hold on, everybody.
There's no talk. You talk to this mic and that's it. Next. Anybody else? Going once?
Can we go twice?
Going twice? Going 3 times? Done. Let's close the public session. James, would you like to respond to the last questions? And anything else on the difference?
Yes. First, it is not the intent of anyone in the town to shut down Aloof. What we would like to see is compliance, and that has always been very clear. Every report, every comment that has come out of my department is that we need compliance. That is our job. With that said, to make things clear, the performance standard review and decision from May 11, 2017, the application before the board clearly stated it was review of the cumulative operations and equipment being employed at the site and additional air quality controls in accordance with the New York State DEC requirements. I think we've shown that that has not happened. As part of that public comments during that, the attorney's comments who was representing Aloof at the time, Ed Roggenkamp, attorney, quote, diluting below odor thresholds and added filtration will no longer smell outside of the plant. That's their comments. It's not working. Yes, Mr. Fellinger used reports that were made available to him. Reports don't expire. As far as inspections, there have been times where they denied us inspections and the attorneys handled that situation. Mike Manzari is the inspector assigned to the project. Mike, can you comment? Do you remember your last time you did an inspection?
It's probably been at least a year since my last inspection there.
Right. There's other inspections that we do on the site for other open permits that they have that have nothing to do with the air quality and the air filtration system. This report and the study had to be done. Mr. Fellinger did make a site visit. He is a qualified engineer with, I do believe, over 30 years of experience in buildings of this type and manufacturing plants. I believe that the evidence presented to you in our reports, our studies, and our analysis is clear. They are not in compliance. And that is all that we want to do is get them into compliance. Our department has been working very difficult, a lot, expanded with DEME, to follow the complaints. We put a lot of effort into this. Filing the complaints and the summonses and the instruments in the court is very time consuming. We're in this for the long haul. We have to make them comply. That is our job. So with that,
Thank you. So it's
still consider my request.
It's still your position that they're not in conformance with our performance standards, whether written in 2017 or even today, if they were to answer those questions.
That is correct.
Thanks. Any further questions from the board? Right, before I close the public hearing, I think we want to have a deliberation, talk to Deputy Town Attorney Dennis Michaels. There's a client attorney privileged discussion. Dennis.
Do you have legal questions for me? You'd like to hear my counsel and attorney-client privilege confidential discussion?
Yes. Yes. That's quite close enough. Did you seek or anything, Dennis?
Good point. I should say something. I think, yeah.
At this point, Dennis, would you like to just read your secret?
Yeah, I wasn't planning on a formal fancy schmancy recitation of why, in my legal opinion, this is a type 2 action under the State Environmental Quality Review Act. which means that the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation has already determined for us and the rest of the state that certain types of applications before zoning boards of appeals and other land use boards are exempt from environmental review because the New York State DEC has determined that they pose no potential significant adverse environmental impacts. Now, I have to remind everyone, especially the ZBA, that this application is by the Office of Building, Zoning, Planning, Administration, and Enforcement, by OBSPA. This is not an application by ALUF for performance standards approval. And based upon this application, it's my legal opinion that it is type 2, and I'm basing it on, it's section 617.5, paragraph C, subparagraphs 24, 27, 30, 33, 34, and or 35. I think the most applicable are 34 and 35, and I'll just read those, but arguably subparagraphs 24, 27, 30, and or 33 would also be applicable to make this a type 2 exempt application. 34 reads, quote, engaging in a review of any part of an application to determine compliance with technical requirements, provided that no such determination entitles or permits the project sponsor to commence the action unless and until all requirements of this part have been fulfilled. In this particular application, the project sponsor is OBSPA. Again, not ALUF Plastics. 35 reads, quote, civil or criminal enforcement proceedings, whether administrative or judicial, including a particular course of action specifically required to be undertaken pursuant to a judgment or order or the exercise of prosecutorial discretion, end quote. And the judgment or order, in my legal opinion, would be this board's decision of May 11, 2017, that's ZBA decision 17-31, which is the very subject of this application. And that's my legal opinion. Any member of the board can adopt my legal opinion as a motion if you wish.
So moved. Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So I'm going to make a motion to approve CBA number 18-19, which is an application from Orangetown's OBSPA, the Office of Building, Zoning, and Planning, Administration, and Enforcement, which requests implementation of specific condition number 4 of the May 11, 2017 ZBA decision number 17-31, in which we had approved the Orangetown Zoning Code's Performance Standards application of API Industries, Inc., DBA ALUF Plastics, for its premises located at 2 Glenshaw Street, Orangeburg, tax map designation 70.18-2-15. And the present application is, I'm also further motioning to approve, is more specifically described in the notice of public hearing and notices of continued public hearing for this application, number 18-19, which notices are incorporated by reference into my motion. This motion also finds and determines that the following report submitted to the ZBA pursuant to specific conditions number 2, 3B, and or 4 of the 2017 ZBA decision are credible, reliable, and convincing, and prepared by qualified experts, who are which relate to number 1, the February 16, 2018 report of the ZBA prepared by James Slavin, Director of OBSPA, and Michael Manzari, Building Inspector of OBSPA, and the ALUF Plastics Overview dated January 23, 2019, prepared and submitted to the ZBA by John D. Fellenzer, Fells Engineering, which expert consultant was retained by the ZBA to assist the ZBA in its investigation of the loose violations of performance standards. Which report was requested by the ZBA in furtherance of implementation of specific condition number 4 of the 2017 ZBA decision. Also, on the basis of Aloof not conforming to the DEC permit application and obtaining that from the New York State DEC. Also further, due to the incomplete answers provided on the 2017 performance standards where they only focused on one area of the production and not the entire building, which was on the resume of operations. And further, they are not in compliance with the control measures that are in place on the resume of operations of performance standards. This motion further finds and determines based on the said ops pay report February 16, 2018, and said Fellenser Engineering report of January 23, 2019, that violations by Aloof of the performance standards have occurred and or existed, and per specific condition number 4 of the 2017 ZBA decision, the ZBA, my motion is for the ZBA to revoke and rescind its 2017 ZBA decision, and also revoke and rescind the June 14th, 2017 building permit that was issued by ObsPay to Aloof based on that 2017 ZBA decision.
Is that your motion?
That is my motion.
I'll second that.
Is there any discussion? Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?